Welcome to Veterans of the Valley. I'm Tom Turbiville. You're about to meet Bill Adams, A&M class of 1941. Retired Colonel Bill Adams, veteran of World War II's European theater and of post-conflict Korea. The things he's done, the places he's been, are nothing short of incredible. But he's had the time to do them. But now as you meet Bill Adams, you, like I did, will find it hard to believe that he's 86 years old, now married to his wife, Irene, for 63 years. First question, Colonel Bill Adams, is how do you do it? How do you keep looking so young, 86 years old? When I came up to your house the other day, I thought I was meeting Mr. Adams' son, not Mr. Adams himself. You look awfully good for 86.
You're gracious and kind. I inherited some good genes.
And that's how it worked.
As far as I know.
And a lot of great service in the military, and that's what we're here to talk about today. Let's go back to 1941. June the 7th, I believe, you graduated from Texas A&M. You didn't have much of a summer vacation. What happened that day?
We had final review. After final review, I took off to San Antonio. Reported on Sunday to Fort Sam Houston for 1 year active duty training.
That's what you thought it was going to be, 1 year active duty.
That's right.
Back then, that's what kids did a lot. If they wanted to get it done and get on with their lives.
That's right.
And that's what you had in mind, was 1 year of active duty, and then you were going to get on with your life.
That is correct.
Talk about from Fort Sam to Fort Sill, to sort of take us through that time up to December 7th, 1941, when things kind of changed for everybody.
They did. I reported to Fort Sam on that Sunday for a month interval for whatever training I could get there with the Field Artillery Battalion. And then I reported to Fort Sill in July, about the 8th, as I remember, somewhere along in that time frame anyway. And for a 3-month battery officers course, a basic course for artillery officers coming on active duty. I do remember that we had officers, second lieutenants, all of us, from LSU, from Oklahoma, from Colorado, from Ohio State, Purdue, Michigan State. I believe Yale had someone there in that course. That was about a 3-month course. And then I was assigned to the 9th Infantry Division at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. They were on maneuvers down in South Carolina, and I joined them down there. We came back and were turning in all of our old howitzers, our World War I French 75 millimeter howitzers for the new 105 millimeter howitzers, and then the balloon went up.
Indeed. You said that on December the 7th, I guess you were at Fort Bragg, and it was a Sunday. It was kind of a day off for you?
That was Sunday, definitely. It was a day off. I was down in the motor pool washing my car, had the radio on, and then when life changed for lots of us.
Indeed. I want to backtrack a little bit and then go beyond December the 7th. Let's go back to Fort Sill. Your expertise from the very beginning, you wanted to be a ground soldier, and you were being educated in field artillery. Is that right?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Field artillery, that's at A&M in ROTC. That was the branch that I had chosen. And yes, that was my branch of choice throughout my service, field artillery.
Right. I guess back then there were some A&M students that maybe thought the more glamorous life was being a flyboy, but that never appealed to you as much, right?
No, not that.
Okay.
And after I got into an armored division later on, no way would they get me out of it.
December 7th, 1941, again, changed the lives of the entire world. How did it change Billy Joe Adams' life?
Well, I didn't have July the 7th, 1942 to look forward to being back in Texas. We were in training there, of course, and it began to intensify greatly. And I never will forget one time, we were out in our little training area, and somebody came by and told us, all of your trucks have been moved, but we order you to move those howitzers back down yonder somewhere by hand. Mm-hmm. And these were definitely larger howitzers than we had been accustomed to, and that that was the last day that I wore my A&M boots.
You lost your A&M boots. How'd you do that?
Through all of the physical activities of that day, my legs just swelled up and I had to cut my boots off. And in those days I didn't think much else about it, just that's life and we go on.
Now, I believe following the chronology of this, you went back to Fort Sill. Is that right, as an instructor?
We had finished our battalion training exercises, and that was essentially leading us overseas. But received orders to report back to Fort Sill as an instructor in the Officer Candidate School there. This was either the end of February or the first part of March of 1942, and I was assigned to the tactics department at that school. Mm-hmm. And we trained officer candidates, some from enlisted ranks and some who had, all from enlisted ranks really, but some who had not had any previous ROTC experience and some who had previous ROTC experience.
Right.
So,
so you had some that knew what they were doing and some just completely raw people that had no idea what they were doing.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
And you had to teach them all. Qualifying them for overseas duty, this was the idea, right?
Qualifying them for whatever was on out there.
Right.
And overseas was the primary part that was on out there.
You joined the 20th Armored Division, went to Camp Campbell, Kentucky, and this was a battalion that you stayed with until the end of the war. Talk about your next move.
1943, March the 15th, I reported on Organization Day to the 20th Armored Division. Major General Stephen G. Henry had a speech that day. The Ides of March, beware, Hitler, the Ides of March are upon you. I was assigned as a battery commander of A Battery of the 414th Armored Field Artillery Battalion. Stayed with that battery for about a year and a half. And we had to train 2 cadres to go out to form other armored artillery battalions, or in our case, batteries, of course. And we got all of that done, and then we were doing our own preparation. We also had some other training exercises that we had to do, that motorcycle deal. Mm-hmm. In the Armored Division, we had, of course, tanks and half-tracks and all sorts of vehicles, and the officers had to be qualified to drive each and every kind of vehicle that we had. So we got some experience at driving every form of vehicle, and one of them at that time was motorcycles. I had never been on one in my life. And I took 2 turns at it, and they said I was qualified.
You were an expert.
I was an expert. A period of time later, the colonel said, Adams, we have to train some motorcycle riders to go overseas. You are the designated one. So having been on one twice, I then had that opportunity to train some.
To teach others how to do it.
But I was just primarily in charge. I had to get really qualified people. I even found one in our headquarters battery who would teach them how to fall to save their legs and everything else in case of that type of accident. We completed that training, turned all the motorcycles back to all of the units that we'd borrowed them from. Most of the vehicles were in pretty good shape. Some of them weren't so good. And I reported back to the battalion commander and said, sir, training is complete. They're all ready to go. He reached over and got a little piece of paper and showed it to me. War Department had removed motorcycles from all armored divisions, except those that were overseas. The commanding general, of course, had the opportunity to keep them if they so desired. It was up to them.
Well, you probably trained some future civilians to ride motorcycles. Yeah. They probably had a blast doing it, I guess. This was getting kind of late in the war when you were there. Did you think that you were going to spend the entire war stateside eventually, or did you think you'd ever be going overseas? Eventually you did. We'll talk about that. But what were you thinking then?
I was wanting to get those cadres out of the way so we could get overseas.
Exactly.
I don't know, in so many of our minds, to pursue the war properly, we had to get there and be a part of it. Mm-hmm. And it was a great relief when, yes, we got the cadres trained and went through our own training and preparation for overseas movement. And somewhere along in there also, our battalion commander was ordered overseas as an individual replacement, so some of us got to move up. And in fall of '44, I moved up and was the battalion operations officer for the 414th for the rest of the time.
And in January of '45, you were sent overseas.
Yes.
You qualified for overseas duty. This was actually as the Battle of the Bulge was going on, or just wrapping up?
Yeah, wrapping up at that time.
Right. February '45 is when you joined as a support, you believe, for the 82nd
Yes.
around Cologne.
Yes.
Talk about that.
One of the axioms for artillery is that they're not held in reserve.
Right.
They are, they don't, in as much as they don't normally close with the enemy, they just use them because of their firepower. And so we went up a little ahead of the division and moved into position just on the west side of the Rhine River and just a bit north of Cologne. We could see the towers and the spires in Cologne on good days. And we reinforced the fires of the 82nd as they were holding the West Bank. They were not, the 82nd was not in an offensive mode at that time. They were merely holding, securing the West Bank of the Rhine.
You were an operations director. You directed operations.
I was the operations officer for the battalion.
And you were in a half track. That was your mode of transportation.
Yes.
So essentially, you were sort of the director of the battalion. If this had been a movie, you'd have been the director of it. You sort of made the decision, sort of what you do next.
In that context, yes. All fire missions either came through or were approved by my office, if you can call it an office, a group of people. Some of them rather perfunctory approval, and the sergeants could do that, and others I would have to be involved. I was involved in the planning and disposition of the artillery as it supported the various other units that when we went back to our division and those operations. So all of the operations, movement, fire, everything like that did come through my section, yes.
You experienced some resistance, some combat during this time, but then you talked to me about when you were moving into Munich. It was a pretty hectic and a scary day. Talk about
there was from Cologne we moved southeast across the Danube River, and we were back with the entire division at that time, and we were headed toward Munich, and we were working with the 42nd Infantry Division. And things didn't go exactly as we planned that day.
On the Autobahn.
On the Autobahn. There was one of the tank companies on the north side of the Autobahn ran into a German anti-tank school, and they lost 15 or 17 tanks that day. And as we were moving, I decided that we should pull off and establish a little headquarters rather than just the communications that we had in the half track. And I didn't do right. I didn't follow some of the stuff that he had taught previously at Fort Sill about reconnaissance, and pulled off into a bog and got my half track stuck. And eventually I had to get the battalion wrecker to pull me out. But as we were there and operating, then we got our direct experience with some German 88 millimeter guns.
Because you were bracketed by the enemy, so...
Yeah, there was a short and an over and a right and a left, and that's when I told everybody, you better start digging somewhere. And I got under my half track, and in just a little bit back over yonder was where they all landed. That German officer jumped his bracket, as we would call it in the American Army field artillery. He flat jumped his bracket, and I made it out all right.
And you made it to Munich and on to Salzburg.
Salzburg.
Wasn't easy to get there because a lot of the bridges, I guess, on the Autobahn had been destroyed, right?
Practically every bridge was destroyed on the Autobahn, and some of them were high, and the stuff was wide, and they had to. And to get into Salzburg itself, we went to, I think it was about 12 miles north to be able to cross the river to get over into Austria and come on back down to Salzburg. We didn't stay in Austria all that long. We came back eventually, very shortly, really.
Right, right.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to talk more about not only your service in World War II, but then eventually when you retired, then came back and served in post-conflict Korea. But I want to go to some photographs, if I can, to sort of give people an idea of what Billy Joe Adams looked like back in 1941 and beyond there. Here you are right here. When was this taken? Young, good-looking soldier there.
Yeah, a lot younger looking there than now.
Not much.
That was at Fort Sill when I was in the officer candidate school. We had been out, and I was probably a first lieutenant then. We'd been out on an overnight operation toward the end of their schooling there at Fort Sill, and that was one of the last exercises that we went out on, and that was taken at that. It had rained that night, and that was a horrible night, but we made it. They made it. So on.
Take a look at that picture and some of the ones we're going to see. You look like the Hollywood prototype soldier there. You really do. Here's another photograph as we move a little bit on into your career. Talk about that. Where was it taken? You look a little tired in that picture.
That was the day we went into Munich. It had been a long or short or whatever night. Not much sleep. Kind of cold. Getting hungry. That was essentially my breakfast in the hands there.
So this is after the episode of when you'd gotten stuck in the half track.
No, that was before. That was the day off.
Oh, this was the day of.
That was the morning off. Mm-hmm. We were going into Munich that day, and
so you were
all of our plans had been made. All of our support operations in place, ready to move forward.
Yeah.
There's my half track.
You were tired in that picture that we just saw, but coming up here, we're going to take a look at another one. There you are. Now you look a little happier in that picture, and you're sitting on the bumper of your half track.
Yeah, that's my half track. That's where what I rode in the primary part from near Rouen, France, up through Belgium to Cologne, and then on down to Salzburg. Very, very dependable vehicle. And
how many soldiers did a half track carry?
I only had about 5 in mine because I had to have my radio operator, or no, 2 operators actually, and the driver, and then I had 1 or 2 sergeants with me as time went on.
Right, right. They were very dependable vehicles. They had to be.
Oh, yes.
As far as the war in Europe, you won the war with that vehicle, right?
That was my mode of transportation, and that's contained all of my communications equipment to communicate with the batteries and some of the forward observers and some more support units, and so yeah.
Colonel Adams, you were awarded 2 Bronze Stars during your service.
Mm-hmm.
You make it plain that neither one was for valor, but for doing your job and doing it well, and here you are being awarded one of them. Talk about that picture. That
was at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, when I was a student at the Command and General Staff College, and the Deputy Commandant awarded pinning that on me for my service in Korea. with the 9th Corps Artillery. So that was the second one. I never did get a picture of the first one.
It was a proud day for you. You know, the final picture that we're going to show, I want you to talk about this picture, what it represents, and then another story that when you saw this picture again, and that it reminded you of. This is obviously as a young girl holding a white flag. Go ahead, tell the story of this and the other story.
This young lady, 4, maybe 5 years old, with a stick, with a white flag on top, surrender, and look at that face, and you know that she really does not know what is happening to her world, and you just want to get out and hug her and tell her that everything will be all right, but you don't know what all is out there.
What town was this?
But I don't know what, I can't remember the town.
Okay.
But I will venture to say that second or third or fourth vehicle that came on by there, some GI gave her a bar of candy. The GIs do that to those girls, to those kids. But when you see that, you also get a remembrance of some other things that happened. One time in one town, some of our headquarters people rounded up some young boys. And the next thing I knew, one of them was crying, and he was 10, 11, 12, somewhere along in that age range. And I asked the sergeant major what that was all about. And he said, well, this one is a member of the Hitler Youth Organization, and his leader had given him a Panzerfaust and told him that he had to shoot an American tank. And he had not fired his Panzerfaust. Now, a Panzerfaust is a shoulder-fired weapon, and it was deadly to some American tanks if it hit in the proper place. But he was very, very upset that he was not getting to fire his Panzerfaust at an American tank. Needless to say, he never did, at least not while we were around there. And we rounded up all the weapons that we could find in that town that day and destroyed them. No, we turned them over to the ordnance disposal, really, but tried to get them all disabled and under control.
Well, the children of the war in Germany and everywhere, these are the stories certainly that you remember. And you look at that young girl that we saw the picture of, and you just hope that A, she survived, and B, that she grew up to have kids and grandkids of her own as you do, and was able to tell stories like you do.
That was some 60 years ago. She would be 65 now. I hope she has made it this long.
I hope so too. We're going to move along here now. You retire from the Army in 1945, but then 3 years later, in 1948, you re-up and talk about your second
slight
tour.
Correction. I did not retire. I just was relieved from active duty.
Relieved from active duty, okay. And then 1948, you got back in.
I was in Houston, and in the active reserves, I was assigned to a battalion out of the 90th Infantry Division, as I best remember. And the situation with Russia just became very tense. Mm-hmm. And at summer camp, I chose to go to summer camp 1948 up at Fort Sill for 2 weeks. And it was up there that I decided that I should go back in the Army. I had enjoyed the Army. I liked that life. I was qualified, and I was greatly concerned about the situation that we faced. So I volunteered, applied to go back on active duty, was accepted, and sent immediately to Germany. And while I was in Germany, I was accepted into the regular Army. So no more of that reserve business.
We're starting to run out of time, and that's too bad because, but we still have some time, and I want to talk about, you eventually did go to Korea just as the conflict was starting to wind down. We'll talk about, you were still there because there's always had to be a contingency in case things heated up again in Korea.
Yeah.
and that was one of the things that you were there for.
Yes, I went over as an individual replacement, not into any unit. And when we got on the ship at Oakland Army Base, the war was still on. When we got to Japan, they had signed a truce. But it still went on, and I was assigned as the intelligence officer of the 9th Corps Artillery. And as such, my primary duty at that time was down at Corps headquarters, integrating all of the planning of the Corps Artillery with the activities of the other units of the Corps. And that was a very rewarding but very, very demanding time. Keeping all of that coordinated and keeping my commanding general informed of all of the plans and actually getting his approval for it too. And it was very, very rewarding.
Eventually, after Korea, you spent about 11 months in Korea, and then you were stationed at the Pentagon, where talk just real quickly, because we are running out of time. Your job there at the Pentagon, as it pertained to moving troops into educational situations.
Yeah, at the Pentagon, I was in charge of selecting officers to go to the Commanding General CF College, and also nominating the field artillery officers to go into higher level schooling, Army War College and National War College and so on. And also for officers who wanted to go into civilian schooling to further their education so that then they could make a better, more efficient contribution into some specialized areas within the Army that the Army wanted and needed.
There's so much more to tell about that story, but we took a lot of time telling the great stories that you did. And you went on to Tulane, and you taught at Texas A&M. And thank you very much for your service.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Bill Adams.
Pleasure to be here, and thank everybody for this program.
You bet. Thank you, sir. From Texas A&M to Fort Sill to Fort Bragg, back to Fort Sill, then to Camp Campbell, to Germany, to Austria. Retires, re-ups, then later back to Europe, and then to Korea, back to the States, to the Pentagon. And that was all before Colonel Bill Adams started his teaching career at Texas A&M. A full life and still going strong. We salute Bill Adams and all veterans. Please thank a veteran today, and thank you to our underwriter, First National Bank. I'm Tom Turbiville. Please join us next time on Veterans of the Valley.
That's it.
To meet and know Billy Joe Adams, you would not believe he's 86 years old, A&M class of 1941. He credits good genes for looking at least 20 years younger. Bill Adams is retired as an A&M marketing prof, but long before that career came his 2 hitches in the U.S. Army, a veteran of World War II and post-conflict Korea. Hi, I'm Tom Turbiville. This is Bravo Brazos Valley, brought to you by Meese & Associates. We'll be back and we'll talk about Bill Adams, super veteran, right after this.
If you are in need of legal services, please consider calling Meese & Associates, attorneys at law. Meese & Associates, an involved community partner. Meese & Associates, attorneys who care about helping you and helping our community. Call us at 846-9608. Licensed by the State Bar of Texas, not certified by the Texas Board of Legal Specialization. Meese & Associates, attorneys at law, 846-9608.
Take it back to 1941, graduation day at A&M for Bill Adams, followed by not much of a summer break.
We had final review. After final review, I took off to San Antonio. Reported on Sunday to Fort Sam Houston for 1 year active duty training.
Then from Fort Sam to Fort Sill, Oklahoma. That was in July.
For a 3-month battery officers course, a basic course for artillery officers coming on active duty. I do remember that we had officers, second lieutenants, all of us, from LSU, from Oklahoma, from Colorado, from Ohio State, Purdue, Michigan State. I believe Yale had someone there.
Then to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, where he was stationed on that Sunday morning, December 7th, 1941.
That was Sunday, definitely. It was a day off. I was down in the motor pool washing my car, had the radio on, and then when life changed for lots of us.
After Pearl Harbor, Bill Adams recalls the training and the urgency picked up the pace at Fort Bragg.
I didn't have July the 7th, 1942 to look forward to being back in Texas. We were in training there, of course, and it began to intensify greatly. And I never will forget one time, somebody came by and told us, all of your trucks have been moved, but we order you to move those howitzers back down yonder somewhere by hand. And these were definitely larger howitzers than we had been accustomed to, and that was the last day that I wore my A&M boots. Through all of the physical activities of that day, my legs just swelled up and I had to cut my boots off.
Early 1942, back to Fort Sill for a year as an OCS instructor, then to the 20th Armored Division at Camp Campbell, Kentucky as a battery commander. It was there he found out, to his surprise, that he was a professional motorcycle instructor.
I took 2 turns at it, and they said I was qualified. I was an expert. A period of time later, the colonel said, Adams, we have to train some motorcycle riders to go overseas. You are the designated one. So having been on one twice, I then had that opportunity to train some.
Billy Joe Adams was finally about to head overseas into action. Tomorrow he'll talk about Europe, the drive to Munich, crisis on the Autobahn, and re-upping to Korea. Veteran Billy Joe Adams of Bryan. I'm Tom Turbiville. This is Bravo Brazos Valley.